Okay, welcome again to Qdabra's weekly webinar. This is Patrick, and today we're talking about how to bring external users into your forms without necessarily using a SharePoint login. And this technique actually is a new pattern for us. It's kind of exciting. We discovered this pattern. We were working for a customer several weeks ago, and we just thought it would be a good idea to show you this new cool pattern that will save you time and money. The idea here is that we're using a form to automatically have users self-sign up and activate themselves using their cell phones, SMS text, a code that they enter along with their email address, and then we would add the information, the user list where we're storing all this information. We add that to another form that we use as part of our process. So the form actually doesn't require users to be logged in, and that's a license cost savings if you're using SharePoint. Obviously, there is one disadvantage. I'll talk about that in a second, but the main advantage of this technique is this ability to improve security. So a lot of people think that, well, if you don't have a password, if you're just using your phone, it might be less secure, but it's actually more secure. You've got 3 factors of authentication instead of 2. The email address that they're getting to activate their account, the cell phone login, people have to type in a PIN or use face recognition to log into their cell phones, and then an SMS text message that's sent on demand. And so there's no passwords that are stored. There's no passwords to be stolen or guessed for future criminal activity. And the real-timeness of it means that it's reducing access remarkably because it's only focusing on the person who needs access at that time. And so this is a huge benefit for companies that have external users. We did a quick poll when the broadcast was interrupted a moment ago, and we asked everyone about whether they had external users, and I think 60% of you or so said yes, you did. And we also can assume these days that SMS is widely available or ubiquitous. Everyone's got a phone that has SMS text capabilities. And the final benefit is the streamlining for external users who are trying to fill out their forms or send you data on the fly. They might be in their cars in a mobile situation, and they may not want to type in a long username and password. So the reasons not to use this approach are mainly because you need those users to have SharePoint features. And here's some examples of the SharePoint features today. We have email, documents, reporting, obviously social, flow, workflows, and web pages. I mean, SharePoint comprises a huge slew of things out there today, but in most cases you don't really need it. The email is, most people have external emails. Document storage, well, you've got OneDrive or you've got Dropbox or something. If you're talking about reporting, well, maybe you don't care if the external users see your charts and graphs. That's usually not a huge requirement for them. Social, well, half of us are introverts. It's hard to use. We tried as a company to use Slack for 4 months, and it did not catch on, mainly because we're mostly introverts here. The Microsoft Flow is a really cool new technology, but we have a substitution that's actually less costly, and it has been out there for a long time. And with Forms here, you can submit synchronously to anything out there on the internet. Finally, the web page part is definitely a ding here. Microsoft did have public web page access for 365 up until about 3 months ago. They finally took it away from us, but you can still use some other kind of a transport like email even, or a WordPress site to put links on to fill out your forms. And the forms live in 365 and people can access those. So without any further ado, I'd like to switch to the demo. So we have a simple list here in SharePoint online. We've got 2 users, and we have a simple process for activating or authorizing users. And that is, as an admin, a site collection admin, I can go in and fill out my user authorization form, and I'm going to, I think what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to enter mine, and we've got, Devin, if you're interested, I know that you're the only sole survivor of our webinar that was started and ended when GoToMeeting failed, but if you'd like, I can include you in this demo. If you want to type in your email into the chat window, I will take that as a go, where you can send me a question, and I will add you to the demo here. And I'm just going to take a look at those questions. Thanks for doing that. Okay, so we've got the form open, and we're going to add 2 new users, me, Demo Monkey that I am, and you have to enter you have to know what their email address is to at least invite them to your new form authorization process. So, and I think what I'm going to do is hopefully spell your name correctly here, Devin. Sorry, and I will type in your name and your email, and you'll get notified because you're external. This is a good example. Of course, I'm external too, and of course, you can watch me do it, and then you can do it yourself and see how it works. Hopefully, I got your email address right. Okay, so we're going to submit these now. Now, when I submit this, the form this is an InfoPath form in Forms Viewer. It's submitting to a web service. And it's mapping to that user list that we just saw. The web service is taking those names and it's turning around and it's emailing. So in a minute, we'll see an email come through. But it's also adding the users to this list. So if we refresh this list, we should see the new users added. And hopefully that happens. There they are. Okay, that's good. So you can see that we're both pending. And what I'm going to do now is go back to my email and see if I got that notification, and there it is at the top there. So you can see that this simple email was sent to me with a link in it to activate. So if I click on this link as an external user, it's going to launch the user activation form. And this form requires that I confirm my email address. If I don't type this in correctly, if I say that it's patrickhalstead2@qdabra.com, it will say, well, we don't have a user for that. So there's a little bit of verification going on right there. If I type it in correctly, you can see that it now is going to ask me for my my phone number. Now I've got some debug information down below. You can just ignore that. I should have taken that out before the demo. And actually, it's kind of good that we have it there because I'll explain what it's doing in a second. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to enter in my phone number for my SMS text device. And when I do that, I'm going to get a text message. It just came through. And I'll type in the code, and I'll activate. And when I do that, it's going to say, success, you've been activated. I typed in the code correctly. And you can see down below all these commands that we're running. We loaded a resource, a mobile resource. This is a mobile-friendly form. You can see that it automatically, we've been talking about mobile-friendly Forms Viewer forms. One of the benefits of Forms Viewer is that you can have a responsive design. It also gets the input parameter for the user. That's 15 for me. Devin, if you're playing along, it'll be different for you. I'm not an admin. It prompts me, and then, of course, you can see all these commands. And one of the commands it's doing is it's actually encrypting the password or the phone number to make it more data private. So now if I go to my list, we'll see that if I refresh this list, and I don't really want to see these items on the right here. Okay, so if we refresh this list, you can see it was pending, and now it should be activated, and the phone number should be encrypted. And it looks like it worked for you too, Devin. That's great to see. So basically what that means now, if we go back to our presentation, is that we've kind of finished these first few steps. So we did the authorization, so the admin came in and they could take an email list and they could blast it into their form, and then they send all these emails out. We're using our DBXL web service to do that. And we've had this out since 2006. I'll talk about how this is possible in a second, all the different steps. But then the user gets an email notification with a link. They enter their email to verify it's them. Then they enter in a text SMS number. The form actually sends a request to Twilio, and Twilio then sends a code to that number, which they enter to validate who they are, and then that phone number gets encrypted, stored in the SharePoint list, and they're activated. And then they can play into our form process, which is going to be part 2 in a couple weeks. Now, why encrypt the phone numbers? Well, this is a little bit extra security. In reality, forms read access to the user list, but we're querying it with a filter so that there's really no way they can get all of the other users with the form. They'd have to create their own form and spoof it, but they wouldn't be able to upload the form because they're not site collection admin. So we're essentially okay. We don't really need to encrypt the phone number here. How is this all possible? So this allows us, so these are the different technologies that have happened over the years that have enabled this. First of all, we needed email. We needed a web page, 1995, information sharing. And then we had web services, started in around 2000 or so. I might have the date wrong there. InfoPath was released in 2003. This was the first generic XML app for Office, and it was upgraded to work in the browser in 2007. Smartphones came on the scene in 2006. We had SMS text before that, though, so we really didn't need smartphones, but for the PIN input. We wanted to have this third level of authentication using a PIN or a biometric, like your finger or a face recognition. We developed this DBXL web service to map to SQL. We extended it to send emails and do generation of PDFs and things like that. And it's still in use largely today by hundreds and hundreds of different enterprises. Twilio came on the scene in 2011, ability to automate sending text messages using a web service. And then finally, the FormsViewer app is the first and only replacement for InfoPath as is with these extended features. So let's take a look at these apps in InfoPath. So we have design support now. We have a lot of users, customers are using the designer in FormsViewer, but we're still using the designer for layout changes and things like that. Now, here's the form, the user activation form. Let me go back to the first form here. This is the user authorization form. So you can see here we just have a repeating structure, and we have some buttons. And this form looks a little bit different in the InfoPath designer because you're not seeing the effect of the CSS. So it doesn't look quite as beautiful as it does in the browser. But we can take a look at these rules. And you can see that when we hit submit, we're actually submitting the items to a list. We're then submitting them to that DBXL web service, and we're trying to catch it if it fails. And then the web service is turning around and emailing the users with that link. And it's also emailing them when they finish the process saying success. And it's using this form for the email conduit. If we look at this form, we've actually got the activation screen. That's the email that you get when you're activated, and then there's the pending one with the link in it. And this link is actually a hyperlink that is being generated using the user's ID. So we set this link before we send it, and therefore it has a specific user ID in it. Then that becomes the email. They click on the link, and then the form knows who they are. It opens up, reads the input parameter, and automatically asks them to verify it. It queries the user list using that ID to restrict it to only pull back the user with the email that they're trying to activate. So then the user enters their email, and if it's correct, then it lets them enter in a phone number and, of course, activate and gives them a success. So that's the way the form works. And as you would imagine, it's doing a lot of stuff here. So it's got, I think the most interesting thing is probably the Twilio piece. And we have done webinars in the past on Twilio, but what it's doing with Twilio is it's actually going to be, let's see here, it confirms the number and then it activates. They have to type in the code. So it's going to be sending a request to Twilio. And we've done this, like I said, in the past, but basically you've got a separate JSON data source in here that you're using to send an SMS request and to get a response. And that's what we're using to integrate with Twilio. Now, of course, the form has to make the request. So let's see where that's happening here. That would be right here. And send the verification is really what we're talking about here. And this is actually sending the verification. It's setting this field equal to go. And that's this centralized logic here. We have form logics, we have centralized actions. And then here's where it's actually submitting to Twilio. So it's actually sending the Twilio message using a trigger, yet another rule, trigger send SMS. And this is in the Twilio data source. So if we go to the Twilio data source again and look at that trigger, you'll see that the form and QRules, which is part of Forms here, is actually building up the request body, and you can see it right there. It's concatenating the from, to, and the body, which is important for the response or the request. And then what it does is it turns around and it sends it using this make request command. And this is a pretty common thing. It makes requests to the Twilio API and using the account ID that we have. And you can set Twilio pretty easily. We did a webinar in the beginning of February that shows how to do this. We've done Twilio several times now. It's a really cool web service. Okay, so that's how we did it. And adding this to your forms is pretty easy. You deploy the admin and user forms. We'll send those out as part of the package today. You can download them from our website for free. In addition, then you can update an existing process. Now, we'll show how to do this in part 2 in August to basically add the Twilio verification to part 2. Because what you want is if we go back to our image here, you want this last process here on the bottom, authentication process. You actually want to query the list to decrypt the phone number, to use Twilio to send them a text message on the fly before they fill out the form. So every time they open the form, they're going to get a text message saying, please enter this form. Instead of logging in, they'll just get a text message. Now, we do have to send it to them directly with a link because we need to get that correspondence with the user and the phone number. Or what we can do is we can have them type in their email address and then look them up from the list that way, because the email address is unique. So either we send them a link like we did the first time that has an ID in it, and then we look up the list and find their phone number from that to text them, or we have them type it in. Either way is fine. But it is another form of login which is not requiring a SharePoint login. And hopefully you can see that with the user info form. So it's easy to add to your form, and we'll be showing that in a couple weeks. Once again, Forms Viewer is getting adopted by lots of customers of ours. I want to quickly do a shout out here. This is our advertisement here for Forms Viewer. Oops, I went too fast. So Forms Viewer is the lowest cost way to let go of your InfoPath sunset fears. Only as is option out there today, but it supports list forms, modern UI, team sites, and you get new features like the cool demo we saw today with the activation and authorization, authentication, saving you money, time, and you get us. So you get us to help you improve your processes. But most importantly, you want the ability to maintain your investment that you've made without having to rebuild your forms and spend lots of money on expensive licenses from third parties. So I guess any questions for me, go ahead and ask them, Devin. Thanks for being here after the GoToMeeting outage. We are planning to do more webinars. You can see that upcoming part 2 on August 9th. This will be a more complete with a guide, so how to, if you can add it to your forms. It does require Forms Viewer, and it is 365 is the target, but you can do it on-prem as well if you have Forms Viewer on-prem, and we can help you install that. And next week, Hillary's doing part 2 of her What's New in Power Apps. You know, Power Apps is great for relatively simple mobilized forms. It's not a document-centric form approach, so for those existing document-centric forms that you have, we do not recommend moving them to Power Apps, but for new processes with simple forms, Power Apps is a great tool out there, and Microsoft has made lots of improvements to it over the years. So Hillary will be talking about that next week. And then finally, on August 2nd, we're finally getting Jimmy to deploy this tool for the modern UI. We have many customers using Forms here in 365 and in the modern UI, but you need a special hack to do this today. So we have a new tool that makes this a lot simpler, and he's going to be talking about that on August 2nd. So thanks again for being here, Devin. I know we had a GoToMeeting outage, but hopefully we got this recording. And if you have any questions whatsoever, I guess you have one question about the recording. Yeah, so thanks to you, we did finish the recording, and I'll make it available on YouTube. I'll also send out a link as part of the survey package. Thanks, Devin, again for being here. If you have other questions, I've stopped the recording. And since it's just you and me, go ahead and ask me a question if you want. Actually, we have one more person that came on. Bobis, thanks for joining us after that outage. Do either of you guys have two questions? I've stopped the recording.